Hello everyone and welcome back for some more Drag Race gossip, secrets and drama. So I'm back for another Have Your Say video, and this video is for Global All Stars episode 6. So today we're going to be recapping this week's episode, going through the results of the Have Your Say poll, and we'll be talking about a little bit of drama to do with some backlash that certain contestants have received after this week's episode, and some unrelated drama to do with Plain Jane and singer Chappell Roan. All that and more coming up in today's video, so let's get started. And just before we get started, if you'd like to join in the fun with the Have Your Say and watch Global All Stars, make sure you check out Paramount Plus, and you can use my link as an official partner, and you'll get a free trial to Paramount Plus so you can watch Global All Stars as well as a mountain of other entertainment. So please make sure you check out the link in the description and the pinned comment. And thank you to Paramount Plus for choosing me as an official partner. Okay, so let's start by recapping this week's episode. So the queens come back into the workroom after Eva's elimination last week, and they're all really sad, and the queens talk about getting in their own heads and how it's getting to the difficult part of the competition when queens get sent home one by one. The queens come back into the workroom the next day, and we find out that the mini challenge this week is that the queens are taking a trip around the world on a flight in 20 minutes, and they have to get into quick drag while on the flight. And what it ended up was the queens were sitting on this kind of rocker thing, and the pit crew were rocking them back and forward, and they had to try and put on their makeup while being rocked. I thought this was actually a really fun mini challenge, and I liked that they're doing something a little bit different and trying to switch it up. And we've seen quick drag before, and this is obviously even worse because the queens have to try and do it while being rocked back and forward. And some of the queens just look so funny doing it. I loved, for example, when Pythia's wig just fell off and she was kind of going everywhere. And somehow Queen Kong just managed to stay almost basically completely still, which I was really impressed at. The queens then reveal their makeup, and this was just so funny because it's difficult to tell, were the queens trying to actually do a good job or were they deliberately doing it badly for funny effect? And it was quite difficult to judge because I think most of the queens obviously went down the more funny route, especially someone like Tessa. Like obviously that makeup was not meant to be good, it's obviously meant to be funny. But then there were some people like, for example, Soa, who I thought actually looked pretty good given that doing that while being rocked back and forward is pretty hard. And we find out that Tessa is the winner of this week's mini challenge. The queens then have to get into pairs, and everyone pairs up, but Nehellenia doesn't have a pair, so she gets to pick which pair she wants to go with, and she picks Kitty and Pythia. And this is the start of where we start to see in this episode that they definitely are showing Kitty being quite rude about Nehellenia at certain points, and I think she is definitely getting a slight villain edit this episode, and she says that Dolores Umbridge has joined her. And I don't think it was necessarily clear why she said that, but we'll talk about that later in the video because there was something to do with this that happened after the episode. And we find out that this week the queens need to create from scratch their own cocktail dresses. The pit crew then bring in some suitcases with the queens' names on them, and the queens go and get their suitcase. And the queens who are told that inside those suitcases they need to pack materials to make this cocktail dress. But what the twist is that the queens actually have to switch suitcases with their partner and use those instead. Now, to me, I thought this was kind of an obvious twist, and I thought it was also quite a fun twist. It would have been a little bit boring, in my opinion, if the queens had just brought their own stuff and then got to use their own stuff. So I'm quite glad that they did switch it up. But obviously it is difficult because you don't know what other queens brought, and some queens obviously brought more expensive stuff than others. The queens then open up each other's suitcases and they get to then see what materials they have to work with. And I think most people seemed semi-happy with the materials they got from their partner. For example, Tessa Testicle was really happy because she was paired with Alyssa, and Alyssa had loads of really expensive items and nice fabrics and feathers. Whereas Alyssa seemed to have from Tessa sort of more like scraps of fabric, and I don't think Alyssa was that happy with what she got. But I think the group that got the most attention, obviously, was Nehellenia, Pythia and Kitty. And Nehellenia got Kitty's suitcase. And this is, I think, what caused a lot of drama this week because Nehellenia seemed quite upset and a bit annoyed about the materials that she got. And at one point she did look like she started crying. And then Kitty asked, "Are you okay?" And then said that she felt quite offended that Nehellenia didn't like the materials. I thought this was really difficult to judge exactly what happened this week. I do think that Kitty was being a little bit harsh and overreacted with some of the comments that she made about Nehellenia in her talking heads. From what I interpreted from the episode, I think there was a bit of a miscommunication. I think that Nehellenia was more saying that she got a lot of lycra, and she was more saying that lycra is difficult to work with and it's difficult to sew. Plus the other material that she had also, she said that is difficult to sew. But I think the way that Nehellenia maybe said it at the beginning, it did kind of sound a little bit like she was just saying that the fabric itself was ugly. She did clarify later on, though, that the reason she was upset was more because the fabrics are difficult to work with. But I think there was just some miscommunication that perhaps Kitty thought that Nehellenia was saying that the materials were just ugly, and she thought there was an overreaction, that she was crying about it. However, I do think some of the comments that Kitty made were a bit harsh, and I do think that she maybe went a bit overboard with some of her comments. I did also see on Twitter, I think a few people maybe were a bit confused by some of the things that Kitty said, so I just wanted to clarify them. So at one point, Kitty called her a cow. Now, just to explain this in case you maybe don't know, so in the UK, that is a slang term, and it doesn't mean anything to do with actual cows. It's usually a word that's used to describe effectively a stupid woman, and it's usually used slightly ironically, and they use it quite a lot in soap operas and things like that when the characters, are slapping each other around the face.
I'll flaming well kill ya!
You get off of me!
You take back what he said, you bitch! You cow!
So I don't think she actually was calling Nehellenia a cow. She was more just using it as saying sort of like a stupid woman, you're annoying, that sort of thing. And then she also at one point called Nehellenia thick. And again, thick doesn't actually have anything to do with being thick or body or anything like that. Thick in the UK is a slang term for stupid. So not trying to defend what Kitty said, because I think that she was being quite rude, but I just wanted to clarify that because I saw some people on social media saying that Kitty was body shaming Nehellenia by calling her a cow and thick. So I just wanted to explain that that's not what those two words mean in British English. But I think some of that perhaps got lost because this is obviously Global All Stars and not everyone is familiar with British slang. We then have the walkthroughs with Ru, and obviously some people talk about the fact that they weren't that happy with what they got. Someone, for example, like Alyssa was saying that she got scraps from Tessa, but from what we saw, it looked like Alyssa was more making a joke about it. So it's difficult to know whether this was an editing thing, that they just didn't show Alyssa being annoyed about it, or whether Alyssa was kind of taking it in her stride a bit more. However, the one that obviously I think most people were paying attention to was Kitty, Nehellenia and Pythia. So Nehellenia again sort of repeated a bit that she wasn't that happy with the materials, but she kind of clarified that it was more because the materials are difficult to work with. And this was a little bit of an uncomfortable walkthrough, I felt. I did think that Ru was kind of siding with Kitty a lot. I mean, obviously you can make your own judgment as to whether Nehellenia was perhaps a little bit overreacting to the situation, but I did think it felt a little bit pointed towards Nehellenia in this. And then the part where they started talking about margarita pizza was a little bit awkward. I'm not sure quite why they left that in. I know it was supposed to be funny, but I just don't think it really was that funny. It was just a bit random, and Nehellenia was also confused. And we'll talk about this a bit later when we get to the comments. Okay, so now we're going to go through the runway looks, which are obviously the self-made cocktail dresses, which was this week's challenge. And I'm not going to give my thoughts on the fashion as usual because it's not my thing, but I will say which of the outfits was my favourite. So first up we had Alyssa Edwards, who was using Tessa Testicles materials. She said she's serving cocktail pop glamour. And this is Alyssa Edwards enjoying the Katy Perry VMA after party. Then we had Tessa Testicle using Alyssa Edwards materials. Tessa said she's been possessed by the spirit of Alyssa Edwards, and you can see it from the way that she's shaking her arm and strutting down the runway. And it's just poise and elegance. Then we had Soa Demuse using Vanity Veins materials. Soa said this is the goddess of femininity, and it's like you have a river of gold. And she's proud of the colour of her skin, and this dress makes her skin more powerful than ever. Then we had Vanity Vein using Soa Demuse's materials. She said she's striding down the runway in, a look. And she's not sure what it is, but it is something, and she's kind of proud. Then we had Queen Kong using Galabaro's materials. She said on the runway she's serving straight up rockstar superstar realness and giving a bit of punk like she's a bit peed off. Then we had Galabaro using Queen Kong's materials. Gala said this week she's serving cocktail glamour without the cock part because she's tucked and wearing pads. and she's taken Queen's materials to make this gorgeous dress with some details in gold fabric. Then we had Kitty Scott-Claus using Pythia's materials. She said that she's serving cocktail glamour down to the ground, and she looks like a mum on holiday. Then we had Nehellenia using Kitty Scott-Claus's materials. She said she doesn't really like this look and she looks like Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter. But she said that she's really proud of herself because she never gave up and she's been sewing all night. And then finally we had Pythia using Nehellenia's materials. Pythia said that she's walking down the runway giving opulence, high fashion, glamour, the Gilded Age. And she owns all of these bees runways. In terms of the outfits, I thought there were quite a few really good ones. I'd like to give a few shout outs. For example, I really liked Queen Kong's because I thought it was a really interesting silhouette and it did look very well made. And obviously Pythia's was incredible because we know that she's going to turn it out. It looked basically like what she showed in the workroom, but even more elevated. And it's crazy to think that she could do that in such little time. And it did look incredibly well executed. I think for me this week, my favourite though was Tessa Testicle. Not only was it a great look, obviously a little black dress always works really well, but I do think that it did look really well made as well, and it looked like there was quite a bit of effort put into it, and it was simple but well made. So we have the judges' critiques, and then later we find out that the winner this week is Tessa Testicle. And then we find out that the bottom two are Soa de Muse and Gallo. The two of them lip-synced the song Bang Bang by Jessie J, Ariana Grande and Nicki Minaj. And Gallo is announced as the winner, which means that sadly, Soa de Muse is told to sashay away. Okay, so now let's move on to the results of the Have Your Say poll. So question 1 was, who would you have picked as the winner in the mini challenge? And you can judge it with whatever criteria you want. First was Tessa Testicle with 29.7%, then it was Vanity Vane with 18%, and this was obviously a very, very difficult thing to judge. It really comes down to, as I said earlier, whether you were going for kind of comedy and deliberately bad makeup, or whether it was a bit softer, someone like, for example, Soa. But yeah, Tessa's was probably the funniest if you're going for the funny vibe, I think. So yeah, I would agree that Tessa was also fun. Question 2 was, if you could pick a Queen suitcase to have, who would it be? And with an overwhelming majority of 65.2% was Alyssa Edwards, followed by Pythia with 14%, and then Nehellenia with 7.4%. And yeah, I can definitely understand this. I guess if it was me, I probably wouldn't have thought about Alyssa first, but I can see why people picked her because she obviously coming from the US, very well-known queen, she's probably going to have the best materials and the highest quality stuff because she can afford it. But I probably would have picked Pythia first just because I know that she's a great seamstress, so she would have bought stuff that was not only easy to sew with, but also just good quality. Question 3 was, whose runway outfit was the best? And we had Tessa Testicle with 65.7%, Pythia with 19.6%, and then Queen Kong with 5.9%. And I would definitely agree, I loved Tessa's outfit. It just looked so good. It was a great colour, black always looks good, but it was also just very well made. And Pythia in second place also makes sense because Pythia is obviously an incredibly good designer, and the look that she had in the workroom was basically what she had on the runway, and it's incredible that she managed to do it that quickly and it still looked so good. For me, I wonder whether also part of it was that with Tessa, because her last outfit that she made in the design challenge was not very good, I also wonder whether it was more just we were so surprised that her outfit actually really did look good. And I don't know whether that's why she also maybe had a bigger impact with her outfit, whereas someone like Pythia, we were already expecting her to be good. So I also wonder whether that kind of comes into it a little bit more. Question 4 was, do you agree with the winner? And we had 80.1% for yes and 19.9% for no, so a very strong result for yes. And moving on to question 5, because that is related, it was, if you answered no above, or in other words, you don't agree with the winner, who do you think should have won instead? So we'll ignore NA because that's for the people who voted yes above. But then we had Pythia, which makes sense with 14.8%, then Queen Kong with 3.6%, and then Gallo with 1.8%. And yeah, this does make sense and this does track with the previous results that I think if it wasn't going to be Tessa, then it would have been Pythia. Or I also think that Queen did a really good job this week, so I also would say that Queen Kong was a contender for the title as well. Question 6 was, do you agree with the bottom two? And this had a very strong result for 87% no and 13% for yes. So moving on to question 7, which is related, which was, if you answered no above, as in you did not agree with the bottom 2, who do you think should have been in the bottom instead? And it was a bit of a split with quite a close result, but we had Kitty Scott-Claus with 28.3%, Alyssa Edwards with 28.2%, and Vanity Vane with 26.2%. And I do have to agree, I did not think that Kitty's was the best outfit. I do think it probably should have been in the bottom. I just didn't think it looked as well constructed as some of the others, and it was also a little bit plain. I did also think that it looked quite like one of the outfits that she had in one of the previous episodes. It was just quite a similar silhouette. So yeah, unfortunately, I would have to say I did not really enjoy Kitty's outfit this week, and I think it probably should have been in the bottom. And in second place, we had Alyssa Edwards. What I will say about Alyssa is I thought it was going to be a lot worse than it was, because from what she said, she only had scraps of fabric. So I think with what she had, she did turn out something serviceable. But I do have to agree, this was not my favourite outfit, and I also think it probably should have been in the bottom as well. With Vanity, I think it was obvious that she was going to be in the bottom this week because she basically had to make a new outfit within an hour, is what she told us. I will say it's not the best look, but if she made this within an hour, I actually think that's really impressive because it still looks semi-decent. I couldn't make something like this if you gave me 100 hours, let alone 1 hour. So I still was quite impressed that she managed to turn this out. But yes, it probably was not as good as some of the other looks. Question 8 was, who won the lip sync in your opinion? And we had 91.3% for Galabaro and 8.7% for Soa de Muse. So a very strong result in favour of Gala. And I do have to agree, although I thought Soa did a really good job and I think she was vibing with the music, I just think that Gala is such a great performer and I think she perhaps embodied the song a little bit better. And I did think they also kept showing Gala more, which is usually a telltale sign that that person's going to win. So yeah, I think it was kind of obvious this week that Gala was going to win. And then finally, question 9 was, who is the front runner, or in other words, most likely to win the competition? And we had Alyssa Edwards with 52.6%, Queen Kong with 29%, and we had 7.6% for Nehellenia. So we still have Alyssa Edwards as number 1, which I think does make sense because there's obviously been a lot of talk about favoritism this season towards Alyssa. So I think that does make sense and that's not changed really in any of the weeks. What I thought was interesting though is that Queen Kong has actually got a pretty decent proportion of the votes now. And I do think it makes sense because Queen has been doing a really good job in the competition, and this week in particular she really turned out her look. So I think that did really boost her in this ratings as well. So I could also see her being in the final 2 with Alyssa. And I think it does make sense that Nehellenia is third in this vote because Nehellenia has also been doing really well, and I think that she's kind of been strong in pretty much every single week. So I think although maybe she's not getting quite as much airtime or quite as much praise as the other 2 that we mentioned, which was Queen and Alyssa, I do think that she's a contender and she'll get into the final 4 probably. But let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think it's definitely Alyssa's season, or do you think someone like Queen or Nehellenia could also take it? Okay, so let's move on to the comments for this week. So my Patreon member Yael wrote quite a long comment, but it said that basically they felt like production this week was quite heavy-handed and it was obvious what was going on, and that, for example, Gala should not have been in the bottom. And I definitely agree, that was one of the parts I was so confused about. Although Gala didn't have my favourite outfit because I do think the gold was a little bit high, as the judges said, I don't think that she should have been in the bottom at all. And I do feel bad for Gala because I think she's doing a lot better than they're making out that she is. And I am a bit confused that she's been placed low in quite a few weeks, including this week, and I don't think she should have been in the bottom at all. My Patreon member Sabato basically said that they thought that Pythia's outfit should have been number 1 because they said that it was, quote, right off a Paris runway. And I can see their point that perhaps Pythia's outfit was maybe the best in terms of, I think it was so well constructed and it did look very editorial and fashion. Whereas maybe some of the others weren't quite as well made. But I think because Tessa's had very different textual elements and it had obviously the colour black always looks really good, but also had the feathers and the arm. I think maybe the presentation lifted it a little bit more. So maybe that's why she won. There were also quite a few comments about the same topic. And for example, my Patreons Shara and Sue both said kind of similar things, and it was talking about obviously the drama between Kitty particularly and Nehellenia and how it was unfair to Nehellenia, and they felt as though maybe Kitty was bullying her this episode. And I will talk about this a little bit later at the end because there was some stuff that came out after the episode about this. But yeah, I do agree that I don't think Kitty looked very good in this episode. I do think some of her comments came across quite harsh, and I'm not sure maybe she didn't mean it that harsh, but they did come across that way. And as I said earlier, I think there probably was some maybe lost in translation between Nehellenia being upset, but it wasn't so much about the fabric being ugly, it was more about it being difficult to work with, but maybe she didn't communicate that well, and Kitty just thought that she was insulting her fabric. But yeah, Kitty did, I think, go a little bit overboard this week. And moving on to the comments from the Have Your Say poll, there was also a lot of comments this week about Kitty and the behaviour this week. But I would just first like to say, I've seen so much stuff on social media this week that has just been really, really over the top about Kitty, to the point where it's just hateful and horrible. And I was actually quite surprised this week that even in the Have Your Say poll, there are a lot of really vile, disgusting comments about Kitty or some of the other contestants. And I'm not going to show those comments because they were just really horrible and very hateful. So please just remember that's not okay. You can have your opinion on someone and say that you don't like them or that you don't agree with their behaviour. But please just remember it is a TV show and it's edited. But it's really not okay to come on to something like my Have Your Say or even on social media and DMing the queens, commenting, tagging them, telling them how disgusting they are and that they should end their life. It's really, really over the top and it's not acceptable. So if you're one of those people that wrote something like that in the Have Your Say and you might be listening to this, please consider that is not okay, and I will not be showing those comments or condoning that behaviour in any way. So now, moving on to some of the comments that I will be showing. Someone said, the favouritism seems very real in this episode. I hate how the queens were talking about Nehellenia. I was really sad to see Soa go home. And I do agree, I think there has been a lot of favouritism and it keeps kind of getting worse and worse every episode. I do think this week that Kitty and Alyssa probably should have been in the bottom because I don't think either of their outfits was the best. And I also agree that it was really sad to see Soa go home, and I really liked her as a contestant, so I was very sad that she had to leave. There was also a few other comments about Nehellenia specifically, and they said, I think the girls aren't trying to understand Nehellenia. Her English isn't that great and they are twisting what she is saying without trying to actually understand what she means. And this ties into what I was saying earlier. I think there was some lost in translation that Nehellenia was actually upset about the fabric being difficult to work with, but what she said at the beginning did kind of sound like it was to do with the fabric being ugly. But I do think the queens kind of jumped on that a little bit too quickly and started being mean about her. And obviously this is an edited TV show, so they are going to show the worst parts of it, so we do have to bear that in mind. But yeah, I don't really agree with a lot of the comments that they were making this week. It did come across as being overly harsh. But that's no excuse to then send hate to the queens on social media or in any way, shape or form. There were also a lot of comments saying that Gala should have been safe and this is BS. And I totally agree. Gala is such an interesting contestant. I really like her. I don't think this was the best dress, as I said earlier, but it certainly was not the worst. And I definitely think it should not have been in the bottom. And I'm a little bit surprised that it was, because it kind of felt a little bit like they were just looking for an excuse to put her in the bottom, because her outfit was really not that bad. And I also really liked that she was trying something a bit different by padding, which she doesn't normally do, but that still didn't really seem to be enough. And then there were also quite a few comments about the margarita pizza thing. And I agree, this was just very awkward and I don't really understand why it happened. I think it was just supposed to be something a bit funny, I guess, but I just don't think it came off that well. And I just really don't think this did any favours in the episode. It just was a little bit uncomfortable to watch. Okay, so I now just want to move on to a little bit of drama and backstage tea to do with this week's episode. So as we know, Kitty did not necessarily come across that well this week, and there was a lot of tension between her and Nehellenia. However, as I said, there was a lot of stuff that happened afterwards, and we have to remember that this was filmed probably almost a year ago, and the queens have probably made up and talked a lot more since then. And Kitty was getting a lot of hate on social media, and there was some really horrible, vile things being said about her. So Nehellenia did post an Instagram story that said, Here again, asking you to not send hate to anyone. It's a TV show, time has passed, and between us queens, everything is okay now. Many misunderstandings certainly derive from the fact that we have different cultures of origin. As an Italian and an extremely sensitive person, I tend to experience emotions perhaps too intensely. And for this reason, I may have been misunderstood. The cow said by Kitty was not an offence. It is an interlayer of her language. We are still playing on her stupid cow at Kitty Scott Claus, and I are very close now. And it hurts me to read some hateful comments towards her. I understand taking a stand, supporting your favourite queens, but do it with respect. Kindness will save the world. Nehellenia also then posted a few other things to her Instagram story. For example, she posted a photo of her and Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter, because this is what Kitty called her in the episode. And Nehellenia said, at Kitty Scott Claus, maybe you were right. And it seemed as though Nehellenia was then saying that actually that Dolores Umbridge comment was not meant in an offensive way necessarily, it was just that they were both dressed quite similarly. And Nehellenia followed this up by sharing a post from Kitty Scott Claus, and it was a photo of Kitty and Nehellenia at what looks like DragCon, and the caption says, just want to come on here and say how much I adore at Nehellenia even if she cries over my fabric. And Nehellenia also shared a post from Kitty where she had reposted a picture of a margarita pizza, which was obviously to do with this week's episode, and Nehellenia had reposted it, so it's assumed that Nehellenia maybe also found it funny. However, a few queens also called out Kitty after this episode, and one of them was season 12 contestant Dahlia Sin, who said, "This Kitty girl is getting on nerves. Please shut the F up sometimes, please." Another person who then commented on this was Electra Bionic, who is the winner of Drag Race Italia. So Electra posted quite a long Instagram story, and basically it started off with her saying that she understands that it's a competition, but everyone should feel safe. And she tagged Kitty Scott Claus and Queen Kong and said, "I am truly disgusted by your behaviour. And also I do not feel represented at all, neither as an artist or as an LGBT plus exponent by Kitty and Queen that are currently bullying Nehellenia in any possible ways. This is tremendously upsetting. I personally know Nehellenia and I can guarantee that he is among the sweetest and most kind people I have ever met. And let me tell you, these strengths are often mistaken for weaknesses. Being bullied is not pleasant at all. I do think many of us have always been bullied in somehow, somewhere around. As a community, we should stand and stop this terrible behaviour towards others, which of course includes Nehellenia. Let's stop bullying people. I am proud of my sister at Nehellenia." Nehellenia then reposted this and said thank you at Electra Bionic and said that she's such a queen and that bullying people in life and online is wrong and we need to stop sending hate and start respecting people, and it's impossible to stop the bullies being bullies. And she also said thank you to Electra for being a great sister. However, this then led to a little bit of drama because Enorma Jean, who also competed on Drag Race Italia, then posted an Instagram story of her own. Now, just to explain in case you don't know, Enorma Jean competed on Drag Race Italia, and she was actually eventually kicked off the season because she and another queen had a huge argument in Untucked, and Enorma ended up swearing at some of the production staff and stormed off, and later she was brought to the runway and she was kind of told off by the host and had to lip sync for her life along with another queen who was also arguing. And then at the end, Enorma was eliminated from the competition. And I did talk about this in one of my videos about banned queens, because Enorma has since come out and said that the queens on her season were all ganging up and bullying her, and that's what led to her being kicked off her season. And this is important because after Electra Bionic's Instagram post, Enorma Jean then posted her own post that said, "Are you serious at Electra Bionic? Like really? Want to talk about the bullying? Start with the season you were on. You and all the other sisters who systematically bullied an old queen starting from day one. At Farida Kant walking out screaming as soon as I walk in. Leave alone drunk at Avant-Garde Drag. Screaming by night out of my window. Every word you quote queens of first season RuPaul's Drag Race Italia say about bullying is an insult to intelligence. Enough is enough, shut up and be beautiful, it's the best you can do, you all." And so it seems that there still is quite a lot of animosity between a lot of the queens from Drag Race Italia, and Enorma, by the looks of it, is saying that she felt like Electra Bionic was being a little bit disingenuous. Okay, so now I want to move on to a little bit of unrelated drama to do with Plain Jane and Chappell Roan. So, as many of you will know, Chappell Roan is an American singer and she's kind of exploded in popularity in recent years. And a few months ago, season 16 contestant Plain Jane tweeted about Chappell Roan, who often uses drag elements in her shows. And Plain Jane said, "Will I get tomatoes thrown at me if I say that Chappell Roan's love for drag feels performative as F? No shade queens secure the bag." And I did talk about this in a previous video, but a lot of people then started criticising Plain Jane and started defending Chappell Roan and said that Plain Jane was just clout chasing or that she was being rude about Chappell. And Plain Jane did also joke about this afterwards at the time, but it looks like she's now since made another comment that has also gone viral about Chappell Roan. So the season 16 queens recently went to the VMAs. Plain Jane said that her outfit was inspired by Chappell Roan, and it's assumed that she was making a reference because she had previously said this thing about Chappell Roan. And at one point during the VMAs, there was a bit where they were doing a photo shoot, and the camera went past the queens, and when it went past Plain, she put up her hands almost to say, "Don't look at me, don't want the cameras in my face." And this moment went a little bit viral on social media, and people said that it was disrespectful because they were saying that Plain was making fun of Chappell. And the reason for that is because in the past, Chappell has said that she needs to set boundaries between her and the press because the press have done a lot of intrusive things, and she said that she doesn't want cameras in her face all the time. Chappell has also stated in the past that she has a stalker who actually showed up to her parents' home and her hotel room, and this has caused her a lot of mental anguish. So people were saying that Plain was making fun of this by dressing as Chappell and then saying she didn't want cameras in her face. And Plain got a lot of backlash because of this on social media. Plain later tweeted and said, "Logging off of drag and hating Twitter for the day, enjoys squawking into the cyber abyss I got the Emmys to prepare for." One of the other things that happened that kind of tied into this was that on the red carpet for the VMAs that Chappell was also at, one of the photographers shouted, "Shut the F up," and it's assumed that they were talking to Chappell, and Chappell actually turned around and said, "Shut the F up" back.
This is quite overwhelming and quite scary. I think for someone who gets a lot of anxiety around people yelling at you, the carpet is horrifying.
And Plain got a lot of backlash on social media, with a lot of people saying that dressing up as Chappell and then pretending to not want cameras in her face was making fun of Chappell and all of the mental anguish that she's been through. However, some people defended Plain Jane and said that it was just drag and that she was just being funny. Plain Jane also did post a short video from the VMAs where it appears that she actually met Chappell Roan and the two of them seemed to laugh together. And Plain Jane also continued to talk a little bit about Chappell Roan on social media when Pop Bass had tweeted saying that Chappell Roan reveals that her hit song Good Luck Babe was originally titled Good Luck Jane. And Plain Jane retweeted that and said, "Gag it." And so again, it looks like Plain Jane got a lot of backlash because of this stuff to do with Chappell Roan. And although some people were supporting Plain Jane, there were also lots of people that said that Plain Jane was being a troll and was being insensitive to Chappell Roan. But let me know in the comments what you think about this. So there you go, there was the Have Your Say video for Global All Stars episode 6. Let me know in the comments if you agreed with the outcome of this week's episode. And also let me know if you think that Alyssa is definitely going to win, or do you think someone else could also win? And if you'd like to get early access to my videos as well as have your comments featured in my Have Your Say videos, please check out my Patreon and consider supporting me. It goes such a long way to helping support my channel and I really, really appreciate it. And I'll put a link to my Patreon in the description. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to all of my Patreon members who are amazing and support me every month. Thank you so much for being part of my Patreon. I really, really appreciate it and I really do love my Patreon community. You are all legends. If you liked this video, please remember to like and comment on the video to help tell the algorithm that this is a great video. And make sure you hit the subscribe button because it really does make such a big difference to my channel. Thank you for watching and I hope you'll join me again in future videos. Thank you, bye!